Good to go. Okay, well, we're going to start going here. I want to start off by saying good morning to everyone, and I want to thank you all for taking your time this Saturday to join us for this virtual workshop, Wildfire Ignition Resistance, Stopping the Disaster. And we hope through this workshop you'll become more informed about what actions you can take directly to better protect your home and overall community from wildfire. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Judy Jakobsen. I'm the Deputy Director for the Central Pine Barrens Commission. I've actually worked for the Central Pine Barrens Commission since its inception in 1993, when it was created by the New York State Legislature. So the Commission is a state agency. In terms of work related to wildfire and wildfire prevention, I have worked very closely over the years with the Commission's Wildfire Task Force that was created after the 1995 wildfires, and I focus largely on wildfire education and outreach programs, and I have provided presentations, workshops, prepared informational brochures related to wildfire prevention, and I'm involved in actually putting out the daily fire danger report that is sent to Suffolk County Fire Rescue Emergency Services and then dispatched out to fire departments. And the fire danger level lets the community and the fire service folks know how, on a regional scale, how difficult a fire would be to control if we had an actual ignition. I was also involved in preparing the 1999 Central Pine Barrens Fire Management Plan, and I've led the preparation of the Ridge, Manville, Calverton Community Wildfire Protection Plan that was completed in 2016, and is the first plan of its sort for Long Island. I'm currently continuing to work on prevention and education and outreach efforts that include going out into neighborhoods and performing individual wildfire prevention home assessments for homeowners, particularly in the CWPP area. Now, before I introduce our workshop presenter, Tom Welle from Wildfire Preparedness Services LLC, I'd like to just go over some sort of housekeeping measures for the meeting. First, I'd also like to mention I have a mask on because I'm also in a room with another staff person, Polly Wiegand, our Science and Stewardship Manager, who has been a great help to me in setting up this meeting through Zoom and is helping me with actually the mechanics of running the workshop so I can focus on the workshop itself. This meeting is being recorded, and it will ultimately be placed on the Commission's website page and also on the Commission's YouTube channel. All participants today will be allowed to view and listen to the meeting. However, your microphones will be muted to prevent crosstalk, and the audio will be turned off to conserve bandwidth. We very much welcome your questions that you can ask through the chat feature in Zoom. I will read any questions we receive for Tom to answer during certain breakpoints during the workshop, and we will likely have a 15-minute break or so at some point during the workshop to allow folks to get up, move around, and maybe grab a second cup of coffee. Now I'd like to introduce our main presenter for the workshop, Tom Welle, Principal for Wildfire Preparedness Services LLC, who is coming to us live from Colorado. Tom provides advice, training, and support to communities, the insurance industry, and utilities on emergency preparedness issues for wildfire. He's the former manager of the Denver field office for the National Fire Protection Association's Wildfire Division. This division manages the Firewise Communities USA program, Wildfire Community Preparedness Day, and assessing structural ignition from wildfire courses. He has presented training, workshops, and webinars across the nation to a wide variety of audiences, including the U.S. Congress. Tom is a retired structural and wildland fire captain with over 30 years of experience in the wildland-urban interface. He has managed tactical aircraft for the U.S. Forest Service, worked as a ranger for the National Park Service, and taught fire science and high-angle rescue at the community college level. Tom also spent 14 years as a senior land management specialist ranger for Douglas County, Colorado Division of Open Space and Natural Resources, where he worked on forest management and community wildfire protection plan projects, law enforcement, and wildfire reconnaissance for the Douglas County Type 3 Incident Management Team. I want to thank you all for being here today, and I especially want to thank Tom for being here today to present the workshop. So Tom, please feel free to start. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Judy. Good morning, everyone, and I appreciate, as Judy said, you guys taking time out of a Saturday in the fall to learn a little bit more about what you can do to stop the wildfire disasters that we're experiencing. I'm going to try to do my best to keep this as engaging as possible when we have to do this virtually. This is a course that I normally do in person and in the field. So this is a little bit of a challenge for both of us, and I'm trying to make sure for you guys it's not going to be death by PowerPoint. So as we go along and you have questions, let's let Judy know. We'll have some time where we can have some open discussion, which I would really appreciate if you guys could engage in, because that gives me a lot better feel for where you're at, and opens up the discussion for really more about what's going on with you guys. So if I can get my slides to move, there we go. So this workshop was made possible in part through a U.S. Forest Service State Fire Assistance Grant and the Central Pine Barrens Joint Planning and Policy Commission. And we've got, Judy's contact information there, so that if you guys need to get a hold of her for home assessments or whatever, you certainly can. And we'll do more of this at the end too, in terms of resources, especially locally for you. As Judy said, right now I'm a consultant with my own company in wildfire and emergency preparedness. I've got 35 years in this business. I was a fire captain in California. The land management ranger piece that I did in Douglas County was very localized work with folks around forest management and community wildfire protection. And it was probably the largest learning experience I've had until I went to work for NFPA as the National Firewise Program Manager. And I went all over the United States talking with people about their wildfire issues. And that was a heck of a learning experience for me. And I think that, even though there's so many differences and variabilities from one region of the country to the other, there's so much that is the same in terms of what our problem is and what we can do to help mitigate it. And even right now, I'm still engaged. This picture here is right before I took off on a fire watch mission with Civil Air Patrol, Colorado Wing. We fly those here along the Front Range when we get dry thunderstorms that come through, and try and spot smoke for early fire detection and reconnaissance. So I'm still involved in the field, as well as in kind of the preparedness mode. So our current fire situation, anybody can watch the news and knows what's going on, but there's always this tendency that it's a Western problem. It's a California problem, and certainly it is. But yet California overshadows a lot of what else is going on. The Pacific Northwest, Oregon and Washington burned really big this year. Arizona burned big. Texas had a lot of fire. Actually, the southeast of the United States, in terms of fire frequency, it has more wildfire than the West does. They just tend to be smaller, and you don't get the news coverage that you do with these gigantic fires that we're having out west. The thing is for the last easily 20 years, we're having a greater frequency of extreme fire, and people call them mega fires, or now they're calling them giga fires. And you'll hear somebody, whether it's a fire chief or a news person, saying it's unprecedented. And we keep saying that year after year after year. We keep setting new records every year. And it's less about acres burned and more about structures and lives lost, in my opinion. And in those areas, we continue to have significant losses. So we have set ourselves up for this in a lot of different ways. Biologically, fire is necessary on most landscapes. It's just the frequency of it varies depending on the climate that you're living in. And it comes in and cleans house, and our forests are healthier when they have fire, when it's more natural, or what we call good fire. However, as we, particularly out west, began to populate out here, and we got all this human stuff in the way, we started stopping a lot of the natural fires. And eventually the Forest Service had a 10 a.m. rule that we would have every single wildfire put out by 10 a.m. the next day. What this has done is allow us to have a huge buildup of vegetation or fuel on the landscape over a period of 100, 150 years. So that's part of our problem. The other part is we have built in these areas. We built towns, we built housing developments, we have businesses there, we have oil and gas infrastructure there, we've got electrical infrastructure there, and other utilities. And so all of this stuff becomes threatened when we get major wildfire. And because of our fuel buildup and quite possibly climate change, certainly we are seeing evidence of that, we are getting much more extreme fire behavior. And so our basic premise of we will suppress these fires is false. We cannot suppress our way out of this situation. And unfortunately, we're spending billions of dollars trying to do just that. And we do it year after year after year, and we keep expecting different results than we get. And yet, year after year after year, we burn millions of acres, and we burn thousands of houses, and we're losing lives, firefighters and civilians. So this is going to continue. There is nothing that I can see on the horizon that is going to change the trajectory of where we're at right now. We've had multiple years where just the Forest Service suppression budget alone was over $2 billion. We are developing in the wildland-urban interface as one of the largest growth areas for development in the United States. So we're putting more stuff at risk in areas that are becoming more extreme for burning. And so this gives us these extreme conditions where suppression is no longer viable, right? So where we've got to get to is that homes and communities and towns need to be able to stand on their own. We're not going to stop wildfire. What we have to do is stop losing structures. Those are two entirely different things. So what we need to think about here is that this isn't a wildfire problem at all. It's a structural ignition problem. And that we can solve. Out of all the insurance perils that I work with insurance companies, hail and hurricanes and tornadoes and floods, Wildfire, at least from an insurance loss perspective, is the one peril we can actually impact in a positive way. And the science shows us how. We're going to go through that. So basically, we got to learn to adapt to fire around us. At some point, it's going to happen. Now, in New York, you guys have much less fire frequency naturally than we do in the West, which is more arid, drier, right? But yet you guys do have them, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But I'll tell you, in my tenure with NFPA, I was at Gatlinburg in Tennessee after it burned. I was in Paradise, California after it burned. I was in Santa Rosa, California after it burned. All of those places had Firewise communities, and that's why I went there, because I wanted to figure out what went wrong. Okay, why did we have Firewise communities get burned and burned badly? And the bottom line to all of them, the common thread, is we were not doing enough around our homes, period. We're just not getting enough done. It's not about doing the work in our open space. It's less about how much prescribed fire we do. It's less about how much large-scale thinning we do. It's really about what we're doing around those structures, the structure itself and what's immediately around it. And so we're gonna talk a little bit about the science that came from Dr. Jack Cohen, formerly of the U.S. Forest Service, who figured out why we're not getting where we need to go with just suppression. And this is his comment that while we're going to have extreme wildfires, it doesn't mean that we're going to have wildfire disasters. It doesn't have to be that way. So, because we've got these extreme conditions, actually there's a fire scientist out of the University of Arizona, Stephen Pine. He's actually a fire historian. And he's saying when we have extreme wildfires, we need to treat them just like a hurricane. We need to get people out of the way, and the fire service needs to wait until things calm down and then come in and pick up the pieces. And actually, that's what we're doing, whether we think we are or not. Are we saving some structures by firefighters doing some very courageous work? Yes. But I'll tell you, in the Waldo Canyon fire that we had in Colorado Springs in 2012, we had 30 ignitions an hour. That's 30 homes on fire every hour. We can't keep up that pace from a fire suppression standpoint. And when we have developments where we've got a lot of homes close together, we get a few ignitions, and now we're getting structure to structure ignition. And at that point, as a firefighter and an incident commander, I can tell you we're out of business. We cannot stop that dynamic. California has one of the largest fire departments on the planet at the height of fire season when you consider CAL FIRE and all the municipalities, and they can't do it either. So clearly that's not the answer. What we need to do to be effective is we've got to do our work around our homes so that we can keep ourselves safe, our communities viable, and allow first responders to have a safe working environment. So here's our answer: solid, maintained home ignition zones. This is a Firewise community in Arizona, but the key things here of defensible space in the home ignition zone are common no matter where we're talking about. Now, the flammability of the fuels can be a little different compared to New York, but the process is the same. Tennessee has a very moist climate most of the year, but yet it burned and burned big. So it's all about a set of conditions. It's not where you live. It's just when those conditions set up. And I'll tell you something that I learned. Here in the West, we can go 3 to 5 years in drought before we get really extreme because our vegetation's used to being in a more arid climate. I can see that turn around in about 6 months in hardwood forests and pine forests in the east, because those plants are not used to a more arid environment. And when that sets up, they can become extreme for fire in a much shorter period of time. And that's exactly what happened in Sevier County in Tennessee. So this is probably a review for most of you, but the wildland fire environment is based on kind of three things: fuel, weather, and topography. Fuels are what's going to burn. So that's our vegetation and our structures. The weather, the climate, the humidity, the precipitation, all of that interplays. And then with our topography, do we have slope? What's our aspect? Are we facing more into the sun more of the day than we're not? That tends to make lighter, flashier fuels on south and southwest facing slopes. So all of these things are in interplay. And if you remember, if you've had this before, the fire triangle of heat, fuel, and oxygen, where we try and interrupt one of those legs to get the fire to go out, we have to be able to do the same thing in this wildland fire environment. Well, we can't do much about the topography. It is what it is. We built where we built. The weather is going to be the weather, and it's going to change. And as we're seeing climate change significantly impact a lot of things on the planet, whether or not we can do much about that remains a topic of discussion for people a lot smarter than me. But our fuels are the one thing that we can impact, especially in close proximity to our structures. So this is Dr. Jack Cohen. And Judy, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to try this audio one more time. And if it doesn't work, then I'm just going to provide kind of a voiceover. So
Okay.
let me try this. I gotta go to, all right.
Does not transfer enough radiant heat to ignite the structure.
So are you guys hearing that at all?
Yeah, it's a little faint, but we can hear it.
Okay, let me, not sure what the best deal is. You know what I'm gonna do? Because I've got it cranked up as far as I can go. So what you're seeing right here is a crown fire. This is fire in the tops of the trees. So this is a setup that Dr. Cohen, Jack, who's actually a friend of mine, did in the late 1990s up in the Northwest Territories in Canada. And they had plots of I think 100 acres, but it may have been more, that they intentionally lit on fire. And then he had structural components at different distances from this crown fire, because still to this day, the news is going to describe this as a tsunami of fire overtaking these towns and structures, or it's a wave or whatever. So Jack really wanted to try and prove whether or not that was true. And so he set this up. In fact, he even had full buildings at one point. He did this more than once and allowed this to burn. And what he figured out is it wasn't really the wall of flame, but really embers that are being cast out on all sides of the fire before it passes, during its passage, and after it passes. And these embers are landing in places on structures that, even though it's small fire, it's directly in contact with the structure or structural components, and that's what's burning our homes down. And he figured out that you've actually got to have that large body of fire within 60 feet of a structure to even start to get it to scorch. It wouldn't really ignite, it would scorch. It was really just about 30 feet before the radiant heat was a player in burning the home down. So he's kind of scratching his head because his experiment failed, because he figured somewhere in 30 to 60 feet this house is going to ignite from the crown fire and the radiant heat, but it didn't, because radiant heat is actually a very poor burning source, and small fire closer or in contact with the structure was much more of a player. And as you can see, we had components of those decks that actually took the house. So here's where fire is coming within 60 feet of a structural component. And one of the things you'll notice is that the fire passes very quickly. So what we call residence time on whatever the fuel is much less. So this is what Jack was really trying to prove, is that as we get to talking about large-scale wildfire, let's talk about what's really burning our homes down. And it's embers being cast out of the convective column. You can see them come out of the top of this brush. And it's not always just trees. And a 30-mile-an-hour wind here is actually fairly moderate compared to some that we get. And yet it's casting these embers, some the size of your hand, some much smaller. But they accumulate just like leaves or snow does around your structure. So think about where leaves or snow kind of pile up. That's where the embers are going to pile up. And if there's debris there or something that will ignite, then we're going to lose the home. Okay? So this is really the premise of the science, is that we're worrying about the wrong stuff. And it's really the small things that are eating up our homes. So we fast forward a couple of decades, and the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety builds a lab in South Carolina. And it's really there to talk about wind. And they do a lot of hurricane work there, of how do we design structures to withstand severe wind. But as part of that, they said, well, if we're going to talk about that, let's do some work with wildfire. And so Jack and another scientist by the name Dan Gorham is there now, who used to work with me at NFPA, but Steve Quarles was there, and he and Jack designed this. So this is a home that they built on a turntable, and some of you may have seen this video before. And they, through research, designed what the average ember kind of looks like, and they cut these little pieces of dowel and they put them in these projectors and they catch them on fire and they blow them at different wind speeds onto this home. And the reason it's on a turntable is they can actually put different kinds of siding and roofing and window materials and stuff around the edges to see how it's affected by wildfire. So I'm going to show you this because what we've got is some bark mulch here and a small little stoop of a porch. And this, I call it the ember blizzard, is hitting this. And this is fairly average. This is not over the top kind of ember production on this structure. And so you can see it doesn't take long for this little bush and some of this bark mulch to start igniting. Think to yourself, folks, how many of you have bark mulch around your house? You can see that it's already starting to engage on some of this siding. Now, if you're evacuated, is this a fire that the fire department could easily put out? Absolutely. But if they're elsewhere, which they're likely to be, and these embers are piling up like they are on the bark mulch, and you're evacuated, this is what we get. You can see it's starting to get under this little porch. And now we're getting some siding engaged. It's going to come over here to this little fence. And right here, this is kind of a change in the fire behavior, right? Because it's mainly been, contact with these embers. But over here, the embers had accumulated a little bit, and this is called an itinerant corner, but it's allowing this to convect. So the heat is going up under the eaves and on this decorative fence. And now essentially we've got a full-on structure fire. Again, is this something the fire department could put out? Yes. In fact, there's some firefighters right here that are eventually going to put this out. But if nobody's there, this is where we lose our home. So let's talk about the pine barrens. They stretch a long ways. In 2017 or 18, there was an article in Rolling Stone wondering if New Jersey and the Pine Barrens were going to be the next California. You guys sit in that very same type of ecosystem, and they are a very special place. I've actually been there. I worked with New Jersey Forest Fire Service and overflew a lot of the Pine Barrens in a helicopter with them. I was amazed, you know, being from out west, grown up out here, I expected to just see solid city. I didn't expect to see that much open ground and that many trees. So I was definitely impressed. And yet all through it, there's a settlement of homes all through it. And we talked about how they engage fire there, but I'll tell you that if it dries out and you get wind, those are going to be the two key things that are going to bring big fire to this ecosystem. But you guys have history, okay? This is a picture of a fire in your area. Looks just like the big fires we got out west. It's starting to get plume dominated. This is decent fire. And I'm going to let Judy talk a little bit too, as we go through these next slides, about some of the local history. Ironically, in the early to mid 90s, I was working with a group out of Boulder, Colorado, while I was teaching fire science. And we actually sent some folks to Long Island when you guys were burning as wildfire support. And that became a training initiative with the state of New York for your Wildfire Academy as we were building up the Colorado Wildfire Academy, and also led to a partnership with the city of Austin. So we were starting, you know, to really collaborate and train folks that, you know, hadn't really had a lot of wildfire training at that point. And we were really upgrading ours in the state of Colorado. So we have that history. So Judy, if you want, I'll just let you talk a little bit and I'll click through slides whenever you tell me to.
Okay, let's see, what is the next slide? Okay, so I guess if you could go back to the aerial.
Yeah. Can you see it?
No, I see the firefighters.
Oh, really? Boy, I clicked back on that a minute or so ago.
If not, that's okay. Oh, here we go.
Okay.
All right, so this is an aerial of showing the fire scar from the Crescent Bow wildfire that occurred in April of 2012. It actually started on the northern edge of the Brookhaven National Lab property and then traveled in a southeasterly direction. This is area for people that may be attending or aren't familiar. This is in Ridge area, and then it traveled southeasterly towards the Wading River Manor Road area. There were a number of issues with this fire that it led to a brush truck actually was burned over and 3 firefighters almost lost their lives. There were evacuations, road closures. Another issue, there's a lot of folks that own horses in this area, and there was no specific plan on how to deal with the large volume of horses in the area. The owners basically had to take care of it themselves, and they were able to accomplish getting the horses out through using social media and other connections, but there was no planned evacuation plan for horses, and it was very chaotic situation for them. There was also an issue with there's certain area more closer to the eastern portion of this burn scar, an area where folks are on private wells. So that means there's no fire hydrants in that area. So that was another issue with water source, and since there were no public hydrants, we did have a tremendous fire response from Suffolk County, all of the fire departments, and in addition from Nassau County fire departments. But even with this amount of response, it wasn't enough to protect every home, and there was a lot of damage to homes. There was a business loss. There was a lot of property damage into the area, and that is why workshops like this are important, that folks become aware of what they can actually do to protect their homes better in these wildfire situations. This is also, if I recall correctly, I think this is another shot of the 2012 Crescent Bow wildfire, so you can see the intensity of the fire.
So this is every bit as much fire localized as we get anywhere, right? So my point is, it's all about the conditions. Fire is fire is fire. You're getting fire that's torching trees, it's trying to get in the crown. We've got old wood fences that'll wick it right to structures. This is all stuff we've experienced all over the country. You know, and I'm not going to go into tactics or equipment or anything, because, you know, people's level of preparedness for this varies because of the frequency that they get it, right? So if you don't experience a lot of wildfires, you're not really ready for it, nor do you necessarily know how to fight it. I'm going to click through. I know there's a delay on these slides. I'm not quite sure how much, so you might have to help me out a little bit, Judy.
Okay, so now you're this is actually the earlier, the more the 1995 wildfire, which actually had two different start locations. This image is actually, I think this is near the Coast Guard housing area in West Hampton, near the North Pine Plain area. It was a late August, extended drought conditions, very dry. The first ignition was in Rocky Point State Forest, and that burned about 2,000 to 3,000 acres. And again, there's adjacent to a lot of very significant large retirement community. They had over 3,000 units, in addition to other homes in the area. And then there was a second start, I think a day or two later, on the further east, south of Riverhead, on the Suffolk Community College Eastern Campus, that then spread southward and actually shocked everyone, because it actually was able to jump over Sunrise Highway. A lot of folks felt it would reach the highway and stop, and then it actually was able to cross over Sunrise Highway and continue through, and this is the Dwarf Pine Plain area, which is very volatile. And then they were finally able to stop it in proximity to this Coast Guard housing unit, which is interesting because this area, there was definitely a separation of wood, the pines from the housing. There were grassy areas and more of a separation, which probably helped in terms of defense in this area. I guess.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
So what you're seeing here is active crown fire. And that's as bad as it gets. That's where we can't get at it. Aircraft are ineffective. So my point is, again, fire is fire. And it can happen anywhere. It happened in your area. You don't get them every year, but you get them. And that's really the sucker punch for folks like you guys, is that you don't have every year to go, okay, we got to keep prepared for this. We let our guard down, we get complacent, and then the conditions change, and then here we are. So that's the point I'm trying to make. However, you guys did take some action, right? And here's exactly what needs to be done. We've got to organize ourselves as communities, as homeowners, because this is our job. These are our homes, our communities. It's our job to do what we need to do around our homes. We got to assess what our threats are and what the hazards are that we can deal with. We got to prioritize those into an action plan, and then we got to act on those. We got to take action. So I believe, Judy, this was your CWPP signing. And, you know, CWPPs are a good tool. They can be a little bit of an unwieldy document sometimes. Sometimes we go to all that work and time, and then they just sit on a shelf. So what really needs to come out of that is there's an action plan in there, and we need to take action on that. So you brought up the thing about the horses. Everybody's gone through that. I mean, I live in an area with a lot of livestock, everything from cows and llamas to horses to, you know, dog boarding facilities, hunter jumper barns, all of that are all potentially threatened by wildfire right in the county I'm living in right now. You know, we had to develop a county animal rescue team of volunteers with trailers, and we work that through the incident command team, the incident management team in the county, so that we can utilize that. And we actually have the open space department that I used to work for. We had a ranch that we had bought as open space, so we utilized the ranch part of that to be able to house those animals if we couldn't get them in at the fairgrounds. So just some things to think about if you haven't already done that. Those problems are solvable, but we got to have that in our plan to say, this is important to us. How are we going to deal with it? Because it's up to us. Okay, so I'm gonna give us a quick little break here. Let's make it 10 minutes. So we'll come back right at, well, I think it's 10 o'clock your time. That'll give people a chance to get, like Judy said, get another cup of coffee, hit the restroom or whatever. I'll be back on in just a couple of minutes in case we've got some additional questions, and then we're really going to start talking about, and I want you guys to think about when you come back, how have you organized in your community, in your neighborhood? And I'd like to hear from some of you. Okay, so let's take that break. I'll see you back here in about 10 minutes. I'll be in here a little bit before if anybody wants to chat. I'll come back online. So does that sound good to you, Judy?
Yes, that sounds good.
Okay. All right. See you guys in a bit. So I'm back, Judy. I don't know if you have any questions through the chat or anything, but
I guess I'm.
We have someone asking, are there any less combustible roofing materials to use for protection?
okay, let's table that one until I start talking about roofs a little bit later on. But then remind me.
Okay.
But I'm pretty sure I'll be talking about some, yeah.
Thank you, Gail, for your question. We'll get back. We'll definitely get back to it.
Yeah, the short answer is yes, there are, but we'll talk about that. My household is starting to wake up here, so it's liable to get a little sporty. Are you guys pretty cool weather-wise there, or are you still pretty warm?
We've actually been getting some very nice full days.
Like I was telling you earlier, it's been gorgeous here. We had great color and you know, 70s and 80s during the day, and cooling down into the 40s at night. But yeah, it's been nice. We had some snow in the mountains a couple days ago, but hasn't really decreased our fire activity at all. We're in a pretty extreme drought right now. So we've got, I think, 3 active fires burning in the state right now. Wyoming too. So yeah, and October's a tough month along the Front Range in the Denver area. That's when we usually get significant interface fire, is in October and then late spring. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started then. So my question to everybody was, how have you organized in your community? So I'd just like to hear from some of you. If you've been working with some, neighbors, or you've got a homeowners or property owners association that's organizing around wildfire, and kind of also who's included in that group. If you've got some kind of a committee or something that's kind of leading the effort. I think, if my memory serves, we have one Firewise community in the entire state of New York, which is not, maybe two, which is not surprising, just because of the frequency of fire. But that's one method of being able to organize, is around that program. So if anybody out there wants to speak up, I'd love to hear about what you guys are doing.
Tell me not to mute them. You can unmute.
I guess we can, we're going to unmute you so that people can speak more freely, to have a dialogue. And
Yeah, this is probably
okay.
Oh, right.
Oh.
Oh, weird.
everything else.
Lost,
Okay.
okay, so does anyone have any experience with working on wildfire prevention initiatives within either their homeowners association or community?
Comment here from Frank.
We do have a comment from Frank. Our retirement community has one border to Pineland Forest. Our community also has planted trees, all internal, that we have planted and are now 15 years old. Should we regard these planted trees as a fire risk?
Well, it kind of depends on what kind of trees they are and where they are. Any plant can burn, some more readily than others, and the closer to structures that they are, although I tend to worry a lot less about trees. Since embers are really our key thing of what's, killing our homes, trees don't readily ignite from embers. Brush, grass, debris, fences, those kinds of old wood fences, those kinds of things do. Old wood decks, those are the kinds of things, and I'll go through that when we kind of go through the steps of a home assessment. But even trees that are in close proximity to the home, unless a lot of fire, and though you got trees in a consistent fuel bed like a forest coming right up to the home, then they're not so much of an issue, right? If you've got some space there between trees and the structure to where it's not going to carry ground fire to the home, then really you're still right back down to those small things about embers. And we're going to talk a lot more about that as we go along.
There was also a question about, is the presentation going to be made available afterwards? We will be making the presentation available through the Central Pine Barrens Commission YouTube channel. And I'll also be posting it on our website for a little while, and then I'll move it to another section under, we have a section on our website for wildfire prevention that I'm going to also be adding some videos to. What is interesting, what I've seen in, I'm not sure what retirement community Frank's referring to, but some of these communities were built quite a while ago, and they still have aluminum siding, which is interesting. And some are now, so they're to update now, people are transitioning to vinyl siding or other more combustible materials. So, and some of the other products I've seen for siding for homes has also been back in the 70s, that asbestos cement siding, which I still see quite a bit on homes as well.
Right. So there's, you know, we'll talk about siding when we start going through this stuff, but it really kind of depends. You know, vinyl is generally, you know, for weather and maintenance, a good choice. For fire, not so much. But you know, any kind of siding, any kind of roofing can have some vulnerabilities. It's just some are better than others, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So, go ahead.
I can mention, in terms of what the Commission has been doing in terms of planning, obviously, you know, I touched on some of the wildfire prevention outreach that I'm doing. Part of that's a component that comes out of the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. Also, the Commission has just, about a year or so ago, entered into a contract with New York State DEC to develop a comprehensive prescribed fire program to be able to manage the forests and create fuel breaks, shaded fuel breaks, especially next to the, in the wildland urban interface next to these housing communities. And the Commission has also been actively trying to engage local volunteer firefighters through our New York Wildfire and Incident Management Academy in terms of training opportunities as well, where we offer certain classes for free. But our main kind of planning document has been the CWPP, and we hope to at some point get additional funding to be able to expand or write additional CWPPs for other specific areas within the Pine Barrens that will help gear us with targeting our efforts to the more high-risk areas in that area.
Okay. And I'll tell you, you know, fuel breaks and prescribed fire are, you know, one method, one tactic. They tend to really be more about a forest health and you know, forest management kind of tactic. We tend to think that they protect communities more than they actually do. When embers can travel over a mile, you really can't fuel break around that kind of potential. So the community itself has to be the fuel break. If you think of it in those terms, fire can come through this community and the homes are still standing. People got a home to come back to when they're repatriated after evacuation. That's the goal that I'm trying to get to today. So by organizing, the whole point to me asking about this is that we need to organize ourselves and our neighbors. One home doing what they need to do with 50 other homes around it that don't is not going to help. And that's kind of the situation we've got going on with all of the preparedness programs we have. One of the biggest weaknesses with FireWise. And it you know, most of the people that are active tend to be retired. They have the time, they've had careers, they have skills, and they're good at organizing their community members. But I could have a community of 100 homes, and maybe I've only got a dozen people that are really actively engaged in that FireWise community. And so we're not getting the scale that we need. And we need to include folks like our fire department, particularly if they're involved in International Association of Fire Chiefs Ready, Set, Go program. The ready part of that, of Ready, Set, Go, is about preparing yourself and your property to be evacuated. And that's where the FireWise program was a partner with them on that. And then to be able to, You know, if we're under a red flag warning, we're set, we're expecting to be evacuated, or we've got active fire near us, and then we get out and get ourselves safe. And with hurricanes, we can generally, you know, tell people where they need to go, right? They go inland. And we've got a plotted track for hurricanes. With wildfire, we don't have any of that. We don't know when it's going to happen. We don't always know where it's going to go. It changes direction. So we've got clearly some challenges with getting people out of the way safely, and at the same time trying to protect our infrastructure. So we want to include as many people, and we want to break up the pie into small pieces. If I've got 100 homes, maybe I've got 5 or 10 homeowners that are really, you know, drinking the Kool-Aid. They're believing in what we're trying to do. But they all know some people. Maybe they're on a cul-de-sac. Maybe they're on a couple of streets. And they can organize those local neighbors, because, you know, with Firewise or with any of these others, you know, you've got a couple people trying to manage the whole program, and they get burned out, right? So we got to break up the workload and share. And people have to share in the responsibility for the community and for themselves, and to lead by example, so that, you know, my home should look pretty darn good in terms of good home ignition zone work, so that my neighbors can see that and go, well, it's not a clear cut around Tom's home, so I guess maybe there's something to this. We can maybe still have nice aesthetics around the home and yet really reduce our risk. And that's really what we're talking about. So think about how you can organize your neighborhood, your community, your HOA, to where you can have more people involved and be able to kind of split up the workload. So the home ignition zone. Now this is with permission, NFPA's graphic on what a home ignition zone is around a single family dwelling. So we have an immediate and an intermediate and an extended zone. The two most important are the immediate zone, which is the structure and out to 5 feet, and then 5 to 30 feet. The science is telling us if we can manipulate what we need to in these two zones, we can actually greatly increase the survivability odds of this structure. Now, where this gets tricky is when we've got densely populated areas, you may not have 30 feet or in your neighbor's backyard. So this is where the cooperative effort of neighbors really comes into play. And so what we're trying to prevent, if there were another home over here, is structure to structure ignition. If one home goes up, a whole bunch of them can go up. And that's the thing we can't stop as a fire department. We did a national survey at NFPA, and I think something like 60%, no more than that, 80% of the fire departments said that they can only handle about 2 to 3 structures on fire at the same time, or they're done. And you know, they're calling in mutual aid, and you know, they're getting help from other districts. So again, I go back to 30 ignitions an hour. You're going to run out of folks really quick. So we've got to be able to have this structure survive on its own. And over the last several fires, big fires that we've had in the last essentially 10 years, more than that, we've estimated, and it's anecdotal, it's not scientific, about 85% of those structures that were lost because of ember intrusion, not anything else. So that's how important this ember stuff is. So let's get into this. First off, we want to, when we're kind of assessing a community or assessing a neighborhood, we want to get an overview, all right? What kind of homes do we have? What kind of vegetation do we have? What kind of access and egress do we have for first responders and for evacuation? Okay, so how do we get people out and get responders in? Do we have places to put those people once we evacuate them out? You know, that's more of an emergency management problem, but you can't just do like with the horses and just let everybody go. you gotta be able to direct where they need to be, right? Because we're going to have road closures. We're going to have people trying to come back in and grab dogs and cats. I mean, it is chaotic. All right. So this is kind of an overview of some of your area. And what I'm looking for is where do we get risk transmitted to our homes? So when you look at this, and we've got all of these areas of vegetation on the outside, and we've got all of these areas of homes and infrastructure, you can see that we can get risk transmitted into these areas should we get an ignition. And all of these, if they actively burn, are going to be transmitting embers, depending on wind and the convection column out of the top of the fire in all directions. And they're going to be landing a mile and a half from that active fire. So transmission from outside the community is kind of a bigger overview, right? What are our ignition hazards? We've got major roads. Mechanical ignition from roads is really quite common. You got a tow chain from a trailer dragging on the road. You've got a blown tire and sparking rim. You've got work being done. If you've got railroads, they're famous for starting fires. You've just got people living out here, you know, and whether they can or not, they may be burning some debris in their backyard and not really thinking about what they're doing. So there's all those kinds of things where risk can be transmitted. Okay, so now when we talk about inside the community, we're going to drop down and really start looking. But if you look, this entire housing development right here, it's got vegetation all the way around it and within it. And so inside the community, we're looking at a little bit more micro view, but we've got a lot of vegetation. Now, again, I tell you, trees aren't that big of a deal unless they're right up against structures, but it's where we're going to get ignition and areas where the fire can follow. If we get crown fire, it's going to stay in the crown. So do we have a fuel bed that is consistent to carry it through the community? And right here, we do. So we want to make sure that as many homes as we can possibly get are securing the structure and out to 30 feet. Okay, and we're a little bit more aggressive in this immediate zone, a little less in this 30 feet, and if we can go all the way out to 60 feet if you've got a larger lot, then we can just what we call clumping or just separating fuels. We can still get those aesthetics. We can have that privacy screening of the vegetation if we want, but we just don't want consistent fuel beds that carry large fire to the home. And then the rest of it is going to be all about embers in this 0 to 5 feet. Okay, so we're going to first start talking about if we're assessing a structure. And when you assess a community, you're looking at that big overall view, right? And when we're assessing a structure, it's really down to the nitty gritty. But the assessment of a structure then just becomes an aggregate for the community. So if I'm concerned about roofing material, and I know we had a question about that, and I'll get to that. If 75% of my community has wood shake shingle roofs, I've got a problem. If 90% of my community has a Class A asphalt roof or metal roofs or tile roofs, then I'm in a lot better shape. So that's how you take that individual home and you aggregate it out to the number of homes you've got in whatever boundary you're using as your community. We're going to talk about windows and skylights, siding, and the foundation. Those are all the building construction. This is where you'll hear the term home hardening. A lot of people don't like that. They think it sounds too military or whatever, but that's really the term we use in fire. Do we have homes that are hardened? Because we've got to be able to prevent them from burning down.
Stop it.
Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is roofs. So this is it's morning here at my house. Okay, thank you.
What was I gonna say?
Okay. All right, so first thing is roofs. This is a Class A roof. It's an asphalt roof. It's got an underlayment under it. These are very good for wildfire in terms of embers landing on it and not burning through. On all of these areas where we've got an edge, we're going to get debris. We're going to get leaves and needles, and that's where the embers are going to land. And that's where it's going to start burning. It won't burn through here, but if it's on these edges, we can get some gaps as these roofs get older, and it can get underneath the asphalt and into the underlayment, or it can start burning underneath the siding. And now we can convect up into these eaves, and we've got ourselves a roof fire. So though it's these minor details that can be so important to us, is that where we've got gaps, we look at these edges, we can get these, that, you know, as they curl up from being in solar radiation and weather, and then we can get embers that can get underneath. Okay, so clean roof and a good solid roof. So to answer the question that was earlier, the roofs that are more fire and ignition resistant are Class A asphalt, metal, and tile roofs. Those are your best. If you've got wood roofs on any home, almost anything else we do doesn't matter, because we cannot protect that home with a shake shingle roof. There are treatments available for shake shingles. My personal experience has been, unless the technology has changed a lot, is that solar radiation bakes out the ignition resistance of those materials in about a year. So I wouldn't trust that very much. Shake shingle roofs are really becoming passe, except in historical buildings. And even then, we've got some fake shake shingles that are of ignition resistant materials or synthetics that will look exactly like we want them to look, but they're not going to burn. So here you can see we can get this debris in these nooks and crannies. That's where the embers are going to land also and ignite this stuff. Now, although this should get cleaned off, I'm not really too worried about that on this roof, except where we start getting up into here. Do we have gaps around these vents? Do we have gaps against the siding? Do we have gaps against these windows? Windows are tough. We normally try to say, you know, you need double paned glass windows. Not everybody can afford that. Certainly it's more energy efficient, and there are tax incentives for that thing if you switch your windows out. The biggest thing here is, with any set of windows, if we get heat on the window frame, it flexes the window and can crack it. And then it can sometimes just flat fail. It just falls out. And now we're getting embers and fire into the interior of the structure. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that's something we need to be thinking about with windows. Okay? Again, debris, windows, edges, siding. Okay? Gutters. We got to keep them clean. They're ember magnets, particularly if they're filled with leaves and needles. There are covers that can work pretty well that allow water to still flow through, but to keep debris and stuff out of your gutters. I don't know quite about expense, but if you're not, particularly if you're like me and you're not so steady on a ladder anymore, sometimes can save you a bit of work. Vents. Most structures, almost everywhere, have vents and or skylights. These, if you think about embers being blown horizontally in the wind, embers can get in here. If that's an attic space, what's in the attic? Is it just insulation, or do we have stuff stored in there? And is that stuff going to ignite? So we recommend that you use 1/8" metal screening behind these vents. It doesn't keep all of the embers out, but it keeps most of them out. And that's key. And so we want to be thinking about vents. We're talking about, with architects now, about designing homes for wildfire that don't even have vents. They don't need vents. They've got a circulation system that works off very low voltage electricity that serves the purpose that the vent would, in terms of air movement, trying to prevent mold, that kind of thing. But for most of us, 90% of our problem is already built out there. We got to deal with this. All right, we've got wood siding on this home, which is a concern. Okay, so we've got to make sure that we can prevent fire from getting into this. I'm not sure about the material on this roof, but it looks like it's asphalt shingles. Skylights, we got to check these for gaps. You're also going to get accumulation of embers on top of this. So we got to make sure that those edges are secure, that we can't get embers around these gaps or around the edges of the frame. So vents, skylights, any opening in the roof, we got to be checking. Then we come down from the roof. Again, windows, doors, what's our vegetation? Now we're getting down to our foundation, our siding. This isn't actually too bad. This is one where a fire burned right up to it. We've got rock instead of mulch immediately against the home. It looks to be like a stucco type of siding. Some of this stucco isn't very thick, so if there's any penetrations in that, a hole in it or whatever, then that can allow fire to enter into the siding. So these are the kinds of things we're trying to look for. It looks like they broke down a fence to keep it from wicking the fire to the home. So it's got a good roof. This home survived, okay, because they've done this 5 foot is pretty secure here. Okay, another one where we had some pretty significant fire burn right up to the home, had an irrigated lawn, which did burn some, but not all the way up. I'd be really concerned about this brush under this deck and this old fence this close to the deck, because it can burn, because you've got exposed members for the deck that it can burn. And those are things we need to think about. The other thing is lawn furniture on the deck. If you're going to evacuate, get that stuff somewhere else. Put it in your garage or shed, throw it clear out into the yard and let it burn. These things are deadly for catching embers, igniting, and carrying fire to the home. I know it sounds weird, but we've seen it time and again. We've seen a broom leaned up against a wooden door eventually be the cause of a fire, of a home burning down from a wildfire, because embers got into that broom and ignited, and that was enough fire to catch the door on fire, which then took fire into the interior. Okay, in Waldo Canyon, we had Denver Fire Department, which at that time was not a wildfire agency. They had all their Type 1 engines, the big pavement queens, and we didn't know what to do with them. What we had them do was hook up tow chains and pull fences and decks off of homes to keep them from burning down. That's how important this stuff is. If it's attached to the home, it's part of the home. And if it's ignitable, it's going to take the home. Okay, vegetation around the structure doesn't have to go away. We don't need a parking lot. What we need is some separation, and we need the ability that if we get low intensity surface fire coming in the grass and the brush, that it doesn't get up into the top of the brush or trees and then really start throwing a lot of close embers or radiant heat onto the structure. Again, these folks have got rock around their house. They've got a little bit of vegetation, but I'm not worried about that. If it burns, it burns, but it's not going to burn the house down. Stucco siding, good roofing, looks like tile roofs. You know, I don't know how often you have tile roofs in New York, but you know, they're pretty popular in the Southwest. But again, they can have some issues. You can see these edges on this roof, right, where the tile kind of joins. You can get birds' nests in there that can actually catch embers and bring fire in underneath the tile and ignite the roof. I mean, it's that small a detail that we're having to deal with. The small things can pay off big. Okay, another really good home ignition zone. Now, see, this is just what I was talking about. We had embers land in these little low ground cover bushes here, but it didn't go anywhere. You know, he's got nice rock. This tree is not a problem. Okay, didn't need to change any of that. This burned up a little bit, but the house is still standing. Nothing got to it that could impact the home. Again, I'm looking for furniture and stuff. I'm looking for other things where on a different day might have had a different result. Okay, again, burns right up to it. These guys did a good job of limbing up what we call ladder fuels. That's where you've got brush and grass that can ladder the fire up into the top of brush. They did a good job of limbing all that. You had low intensity fire come up here and stop. Okay, little bit of spotting over in here because they've got some brush in here. This stuff I would have probably recommended that they either remove or really cut back because it's underneath this overhang, and that way you get more radiant and convected heat. If it penetrates the stucco, we're going to lose this home. Okay, we've got some kind of a heater or vent here. We want to make sure about those, particularly with this brush right underneath it, that we can't carry fire right into the inside of the home. Okay, this one's got a wall around it for low intensity fire that can work okay, but we got a wood gate, we got brush going over it. Now, if these are all irrigated, you know, we've got a drip system on them, they stay fairly wet, they might hold. But remember, when we get really extreme conditions, we've got dry, hot winds. It can dry this stuff out pretty quickly. And then that allows it to possibly start out. Now, heavy wood timbers, like a wall home and big timbers under a deck, tend to be pretty ignition resistant. They'll scorch, but they won't readily ignite. It's the small ones. Think your campfire, right? You don't start it with a log. You start it with kindling. So the smaller stuff is what's going to matter. Okay, here's where topography starts to come into play. They built kind of out over a slope. There is a ton of vegetation here, thick vegetation, that if this is crowning and burning actively, it's going to carry that fire directly to that deck. This is a problem, you know, and so you'd want to get this stuff cut back a bit or have decking material that is really ignition resistant. The rest of the house is pretty decent. It's newer construction, but you know, it's the attachments that can get going. I'm not sure, but if that's a wood pile on that deck, that's an absolute no-no. Those need to be 30 feet or more away from the home. And I know for people that have wood burning stoves and stuff, that's a real pain in the neck in the winter. So many of us are not allowed to have actual wood burning stoves anymore because of air quality in populated areas, that it's becoming less and less of a problem. But the more rural you are, or in areas where air quality isn't that much of an issue, it's pretty common to have regular fireplaces and wood burning stoves, and therefore you'll have wood piles. Okay, here again, debris. We've got to keep this stuff clean, and it's not just once a year. And little stoop steps like this, and we've got this lattice work underneath the siding, which appears to be wood. There's probably debris back in here we can't even get to. This is an ember trap, and this will burn this house down. Just this little thing right here. Okay, you can see where it accumulates, kind of like I said, with a blizzard of snow. Where your debris accumulates is where your embers are going to accumulate. And if the two of those coincide in the same spot, you're going to get ignition. And now we've got wood here. I'm thinking this is part of a fence or a deck. You're gonna potentially ignite this wood, and you can lose the house because it's going to have time to burn. Okay, again, we got this hedge here right against this old wooden stairwell or stairway. We've got stuff underneath it. This is all it could take to burn this house down. This is probably vinyl siding. Vinyl will melt and then ignite. And if you've got vinyl around these as window frames, those will melt and the windows will fail if fire gets right against it. So the further we can keep fire away from a home, if it's vinyl sided, the better off we are. This is a real concern. I would, if this were my home, this would be a priority for me to build it out of something else. Again, debris under decks. Low decks especially are a problem because you can't get underneath there to clean it out. And so we've got needles, we can have leaves. You know, in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, one of the big movers of fire, because that was a fall fire, were leaves. And leaf blowers became a real fire suppression tool, which I'd never heard of in my life. But it was pretty effective in people trying to get the leaves away from their home and be able to keep it from burning down. Now, it's not recommended. Yeah, you should be evacuated at that point. But some people did stay, and a couple of them were ex-firefighters, and they managed to keep the fire off. But that was, you know, whatever's burning is the problem. Whether it's debris leaves or it's pine needles. In the Southeast, they landscape with this stuff. They call it pine straw. You can buy it at the hardware store in a bale and put it out on your yard, because a lot of them put it out there because they don't want to have to mow grass. So they just use it as a ground cover. But it's, you know, embers land on it, it's going to ignite. I mean, this is the kind of stuff in a survival situation you start fire with. So it's really, you know, counterproductive to what we're trying to achieve. Again, debris right up against the house, against a wood step. This has got to get cleaned out. This is bark mulch underneath. Time and again, we've had to deal with this. It is a readily receptive area for embers to ignite. I've got HOAs right up the road from me that require this against the foundation, and they live in a fire-prone zone. And that's where we got to start working with HOAs and their CC&Rs to get that stuff changed. Because we're just working against ourselves. And when the bad day happens, this is the stuff that's going to matter. So, just for something to think about, how many of you have actually, and you can answer or not, I'd love to hear from you if you will, have done assessments in your communities or even done an assessment on your own home. I know Judy's done some, but you as community leaders, as concerned citizens, as members of the fire department, you know, are you doing this kind of thing? I mean, all of this information is available in multiple resources, and I'll give you some at the end of this presentation. So the information is out there, and this is science-based. And if you need some proof, the next time you watch the news, and they always show you a smoking foundation, what I want you to do is not look at the foundation, but I want you to look at the perimeter. And I'm going to bet that 9 out of 10 times what you're seeing are some green trees around that structure. And that is proof that that home burned down from ember ignition or structure to structure ignition. But generally, if it's structure to structure, the trees go too. And any scorching of the trees is from the structure fire itself, not the wildfire. And we see this time and time and time again on hundreds to thousands of homes that are lost, and the trees are still standing and green around them. So, any comments on getting assessments done or experience with that or desire to get that done in your community or even around your own home?
Frank Perry says our HOA has performed home assessments.
Okay, good.
Frank, are you from Long Island or elsewhere? Oh. Sam, muted.
Yes, can you hear me there?
Yeah.
Yes, hear you.
I'm from Barnegat, New Jersey, and we were one of the first HOAs to become a Firewise community. We have a very active chairman of a small committee that is very involved and keeps us on track. One of our problems is to educate our residents because we're only about 164 homes, a small community. It's a difficult thing to educate our community that we have a possible problem. Even though in past years we were evacuated twice with fires that were in the pine barrens, that they were years ago, and people nowadays just think it's not something to worry about. So one of our problems is just to continually try to educate people. This workshop has been very, very good, and I just wish that I could get more people from our group to view it and allow us to sort of, all see what you're talking about.
Yeah, Frank, I've been to Barnegat, and you guys have done a fantastic job there. I got to work with John Cowie before he passed away, and you guys lost a real advocate there.
Yes.
And I will tell you that that is work you guys absolutely need to do, but you've got some great folks in the state of New Jersey organization to help with that.
Yes.
You've been active in Firewise, and it's one homeowner at a time, right? And you got to just keep that momentum going to get the scale that you need. If you've got 100 homes, all 100 of them need to be doing stuff, and there's just no way to sugarcoat that piece of it. And I know that is the problem, is we just can't get enough homes doing what they need to do for this to work yet. And yet we know it works. So I commend you for the work that you guys have done in your community, and keep it up. It is not easy, but it's the only thing that's going to matter.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks, Tom.
Anybody else?
We had a comment from Chart Guthrie that he would like to get an assessment of his home, and I can definitely reach out to follow up with you on that, Chart. And he'd like to get a workshop presentation for his local community organization once we resume meetings after COVID.
Very good.
He had a question now. Are there treatments to reduce the flammability of cedar siding?
All right, this is Tom's personal opinion. I am not an advocate of treatments. There's just too much guesswork there, and how long they will last. However, there is a series of information sheets on the Firewise website that we did when I was there. We did in conjunction with IBHS, the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. And one of them is on coatings. And it's about coatings for decks and sidings and that. And I mean, it's science-based, it's unbiased. There's pros and cons. And I would encourage you to find that on their website, and you can download them. You can, there's a bunch of them. There's stuff on decks, there's stuff on roofs, but there is one on coatings. And that's probably going to give you the most information based on scientists that have tested them. People can sell you anything. It doesn't mean it's been tested. I've had discussions with some manufacturers, and they never really tested them in actual fire conditions. But that's not everybody, so I don't want to speak for the whole industry, because that's really not my role. But I think it's a thing where, buyer beware, and do your homework. Because the last thing you want to do is think you're safe and you're not. That you think your home is not going to burn down, and it might. This is why I go back to the work we do in the home ignition zone. If we move our vegetation and our threats back, it doesn't matter what siding we have. Roof is another story, but for siding, we can move stuff back, right? We can create a little bit bigger barrier of non-combustibility, and that's what that 0 to 5 feet needs to be. It needs to be non-combustible, so that then those materials become less of a factor. We don't need to worry about whether we have a coating that lasts more than a year or not, because we can't get enough heat against it for it to ignite in the first place. So that's where I'm going to go, and that's where the science is telling us we can rely on, that we've given our home the greatest amount of survivability. Now, at the end of the day, nothing's 100%. This is a fire is a very variable living thing. So I wish I could tell you, do this stuff and you got a 100% chance your home's going to survive. I can't do that, and you know I can't. But what I will say is we've got a much greater chance of homes surviving if we do this stuff. And particularly if we do it home after home after home. And as Frank was saying, like in Barnegat, where we've got a very involved community, a very involved fire department, one of the first Ready, Set, Go fire departments, I think, in the nation. You know, they've got a lot of good stuff going on there, but they've got a lot of risk. So that's smart. Okay, so one of the things that people struggle with is like, how do I remember all this stuff, and how do I know, you know, how to really do an assessment? So this is just a kind of a screenshot of the FireWise USA Community Risk Assessment. It's online. It's also a fillable form that you can do on an iPad or something. Megan Fitzgerald McGowan, who is now the FireWise manager, is still there. She and I created this. It's really kind of consistent with a program called SouthWrap, which is the Southern Wildfire Risk Assessment Portal. It kind of follows their format, but you can print it out and write on it, or you can use it on a tablet. That's just one of many types of assessment forms. The Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network, and I'll have some of these resources at the end. Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network has another assessment form that may be more usable for you, but just get something so that you've got a way to systematically assess homes and communities, is my point here. And so once we've assessed, then we need to list out what's the good stuff we've got going on. Hey, our community didn't have a single shake shingle roof. Great. We've got 90% that have Class A asphalt roofs. Great. Okay, what are the things we need to work on? Okay, all of our immediate zones really need some work. We've got to get rid of bark mulch. We've got to clean gutters, and we've got to, you know, move some bushes back, and we've got to get rock against our foundations, and we might need to thin up some ladder fuels under some larger bushes in the intermediate zone and the immediate zone. Those are the things that we list out, and then we prioritize those. What are the things that are going to probably burn my house down first? And those are the things that we're going to work on. And here's where we come together as a community. This is where we have this overall inclusion. Do we have faith-based groups that can help? Particularly if we've got older, retired, or elderly folks that really shouldn't be up on a ladder, like me. Or we've got disabled veterans, or, you know, anybody that's at risk that really can't do this work. Can we get together as a community and help them out? Can we help neighbor to neighbor? You know, I'll come work on your house on Saturday, and on Sunday you come over to my house, and we're going to do the same thing. And those two next door neighbors are working to mutually protect each other, so that instead of structure to structure ignition, I get structure to structure protection. That's what we got to do to break the chain. Because remember what I told you, if we get structure to structure ignition, we're out of business as a first responder, as a fire department. So we have to interrupt that chain. We as homeowners, we as community. So we prioritize those and we act. And it's mandatory for individual homes and for the whole community. And we need to involve our local government folks. This is a grassroots effort, folks. And if you don't make it important to your elected officials, it won't be. But if it's important enough to you that the people that you elect need to be talking about wildfire protection, then it's going to be important to them. And that's where we need to be. because they don't like to talk about stuff that scares people or seems like we're going to limit what you can do as a private property owner. They don't like to talk about that stuff. And out here in the Wild West, and with property ownership being like a major radical deal here, it can be really unpopular. But the fact of the matter is, you're not safe if I'm not safe, and I'm not safe if you're not safe. That's the way it is when we've got densely populated suburban areas in the interface. That's just the way it is. And we've got to deal with it, or we got to burn down. And I'll tell you, if we cannot get communities to do this, then my advice to them is to get as much insurance as you possibly can and really work hard on getting good evacuation plans and practice and exercise those plans, so we get people and their stuff, their important stuff, out of the way, and then let fate do what it's going to do. And actually, I had that conversation with a community and its fire chief in Arizona, because they were at such high risk and seemed so dysfunctional in trying to do anything about it, that I told them, get as much insurance and really work on evacuation. And I said that right to the fire chief. And those are pretty harsh words from somebody like me, but I'm tired of seeing people crying in front of their homes. I'm tired of seeing people killed in evacuations. This is unnecessary. So we either work on it or we don't. And so it's a choice we're going to make. We choose to live where we choose to live, and we can choose to do something about our risks. We can choose to have adequate insurance and make sure we're checking on that every year. We can choose to have a home inventory for insurance, so if we do burn down, we can help that agent get as much to put us back together as we can. But let me tell you, the current way things are going, it's taking 2 to 5 years for people to get back even close to being whole once they burn down. In Santa Rosa, when they burned down in California a 3 years ago, the estimate was 5 years, because there was no place for the workers who were going to rebuild them to live without a 2 to 3 hour commute, because there just wasn't anything available. So when you think about the businesses that are impacted by this, we didn't used to burn down whole towns, but we are now. Where are those employees going to go? The schools are burned down or they're closed. Where are the kids going to go to school? They were going to school in the teachers' homes in Paradise as they were attempting to rebuild. That's the only thing they could do. We lost a couple of schools there. The hospital caught on fire, but they were able to keep it from burning down. I mean, these are things we hadn't seen before. A huge Safeway store burned down. We've lost like a Costco or a Lowe's or a Home Depot, these big box stores. We never used to do that before, but we are now. So we got to think about this. This situation has changed, and we've got to change with it, or we lose. So, like I said, at the end of the day, it's up to us to do our part. Or we're not going to change this disaster scenario we are living year after year after year. So we got to think about what outcomes we want and how to get there. So the question I'm asking all of you is, are you prepared for this as a community and as an individual homeowner? So here's some resources for you. I wouldn't get too crazy about scribbling these down, but I just wanted to kind of provide some kind of players in this. Obviously, Firewise USA, it's in 42 states. It's over 1,600 communities. Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network, some partners that I worked with when I was at NFPA. They are tied in with the Nature Conservancy, so they're doing a lot of different things, but they really have some good methods and information on community networking and learning. So, you know, and it's not a one or the other kind of thing. All of these can work in concert with each other. Another really good resource that I didn't list here that I should have is the Living with Fire program, which is out of the University of Nevada, Reno, has got some great resources, printed materials and stuff that you can use for your education events. But it's got to get beyond education, folks. It's got to get to action. We have got to get the work done. And then Ready, Set, Go, I've already mentioned, from International Association of Fire Chiefs. That's really a membership and information program for fire departments to be able to engage their communities around wildfire preparedness and protection. So again, thanks to Judy and her partners, we were able to make this workshop available. I'm at this point done, but I will gladly stay on the line if we've got further questions or comments. But I just want to make sure that you guys know that Judy is a local resource for you guys to use. She's been in this business a while. She knows how to get a hold of me if needed. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll entertain any questions or comments if you have.
We did get a comment from Gail about, she says we have a number of elected officials who are also firefighters. Rudy Sunderman, Joe DiStefano, Mike LaQuerco. She'd like to see host a series of presentations at local libraries with them as co-sponsors, and of course that all depends on this COVID situation.
Sure.
Which is something that could be definitely worked on. I think it's important to get key people in, like Mike LaQuerco and others, that help draw people to these meetings so that they understand that they're important, and and for these people, whether they're political or not, understand that wildfire is definitely a concern for us in the Pine Barrens area.
Well, I would say, boy, what an opportunity you have there if you've got elected officials. They also have a fire background, even if they're not super knowledgeable wildland people. You know, they're seeing what's going on, and they've got an eye and an ear to that you know, a regular civilian might or might not, and also an eye, if they're still active on a fire department, as to what the capabilities of their fire department is. And you know, FEMA has grant funding now that for mitigation grants for pre-event, so you don't have to actually have a significant fire before some of these grants are available. And you need to work with your emergency management folks to get access to those that can help with mitigation projects. Also, assistance to firefighter grants, which are really helpful in training and equipping folks for wildfire or other you know, perils, depending on where you're at. But you know, that grant funding is out there, and sometimes it's a pain in the neck to get through the process and do all the accounting, but it's a way to get funding. So those fire chiefs and firefighters that are also elected officials need to be keyed into that and working with their emergency management folks to get some of that funding to help folks get the job done. Any other questions or comments? All right, well, thank you all very much. I hope this was useful to you. And if anybody needs to get a hold of me, Judy's got my contact information, and I welcome any discussions where I can be of assistance to anybody.
I think the last thing was Frank's question here. He wasn't able to hear.
Oh, there was one question which you did address, but unfortunately Frank had lost his sound, so he didn't hear your answer. And it was the question about this HOA that has trees planted internally at the front of each home, 15 to 20, mainly oak trees. We have several common areas of natural pines. We are a Firewise community. That was Frank from Barnegat, I think, that had asked this question, and you had responded about it's more structural than.
Yeah, it's really about what, you know, the types of trees, again, and their proximity to structures, and whether there's like a solid mat of trees that can carry fire directly, you know, crown fire to the house, or if they're separated and it's just a few trees and, you know, they're 15, 20 feet away from the house or whatever, then I'd say that's not an issue because they're not going to ignite from embers. It's really what's more right against the home that I worry about. I mean, we've even had people out here with a great big ponderosa pine tree growing up through their deck, right? They built their deck around it. I'm less worried about that tree than I am the furniture that they've got on their deck, right? Because what's the little stuff that's going to ignite from embers? So, without being able to see those trees, Frank, it's a little, I'm going out on a limb here to make a statement here, but, trees just don't ignite from fire. From embers. Brush and grass do. And if they're a little bit of ways away from the structure, or they're not overhanging the roof line or anything, then I'd say they're probably not that much of an issue.
Right. Thank you, Tom.
All right. Again, thank you all very much.
Tom, thank you so much for your presentation today. I really appreciate the effort you've put into this. I thought it was very, very informative workshop.
Thank you.
And Tom, just in the comments, Kathy Schwager said, thank you so much for your time. It was great information. Gail also echoed that. She identified that she learned a lot, and Chart expressed his thanks as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And Judy, we'll touch base next week sometime.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
No, bye now.